All right. We'll wait for good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait for everyone to come into the room. Welcome, welcome. Okay, I think just a few more seconds here. All right, I will kick it off for us. Hello, everyone. Good morning from California. I'm really excited for today's session here. I'm Alice. Um, I am on the Executive Council for WAPOR and just thrilled to be hosting this session this morning here. And the title, of course, is on the introducing the new UN Handbook on Surveys on Households and Individuals, Foundations, and Emerging Approaches. This is, I'm sure you will expect, is a labor of love from our authors that are presenting today, and really just something that is foundational and really hoping for us to really understand the hard work that's gone into making this possible. And really excited to introduce our two presenters today. Hao Chen works at the UN Statistics Division as a coordinator for the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. And I'm sure you've seen her around at WAPOR presenting a number of things. She'll be there this May as well. And Charles here, I'm sure you've seen him on the listserv. I've definitely seen Charles respond to a number of things on the WAPOR and WAPOR listservs. He is the Deputy Global Research Director at Gallup. And has been a survey methodologist for the last couple decades. And we're really excited for him and Howie to be talking about this. I think I came across this sometime last year and saw that it was so impactful and so detailed. And the creation of this book is really culminating so much of what all of us as a field is doing. And I thought it was really necessary to bring it to all of our attention and just ensure that we all make use of this handbook. So I will going to turn it to Howie and Charles. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Really appreciate all of your time. They will take questions at the end, but you're welcome to put anything in the chat as you're kind of listening to things, and then we can address that later on. So Howie and Charles, turning it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you to everyone who's joined today. I see lots of familiar faces on the participant list and a bunch of new ones too. So I hope to get to know you more. So this is a webinar series on the handbook of surveys of households and individuals, foundations and emerging approaches. We'll go in depth about the content and process for the handbook. So here's a little outline for the presentation today. So we'll do the first 45 minutes or so, we'll do presentation. As Alex said, please feel free to put things in the chat just so you remember. We'll start just briefly with how you will go over the group that she coordinates at the UN, and how you will also share the handbook development and overview, look on the process. The third portion, I'll talk about the Chapter 1 of the handbook kind of talks about the overview of the survey landscape, right? What's going on in surveys now and looking ahead to the future. The backbone of the handbook is chapters 2 through 10, which represents the core technical tasks for completing surveys. Pretty much every survey has these tasks. So it's impossible to review everything, right? That's not our intention here, but our intention is for each of the technical tasks. So questionnaire, sampling, data collection, weighting, etc. To go through kind of a summary of what the handbook covers and then call out key aspects that you might find interesting, right? So little nuggets like, hey, you might want to take a look at this aspect of chapter 6, for example. And then we'll also highlight some emerging approaches. Then Howie will talk about the specific part 2 of the handbook, which looks at specific content, population groups, country context, and we'll have some discussion. Now, this webinar is going to be a little bit different in the sense that, a lot of webinars are about like subject matter experts, like talking at the audience as the expert, and then kind of fielding questions or presenting a specific research study or a series of experiments, for example. This is a very different type of webinar. So if you're looking to switch up the kind of webinars you do, this is for you, okay? We This is a little bit more of a two-way webinar in the sense that our team has been working really hard to develop the handbook over the last 2 years, and now we're putting our baby out in the world, okay? And this is not a book designed to sit on a shelf. This is a book to be designed to use. So we listed a few discussion questions here. So we really hope you think about these questions as we go through the presentation and be ready to jump in with your ideas during the discussion portion, right? So I think in particular, what are some emerging areas that we need to add to the handbook, innovations, new technologies, et cetera. We'll have a online web-based tool to display the handbook content. We're also going to build a resources section with like checklists, templates, other practical resources. So what are those things that you can maybe add? And how can we support dissemination and sort of like what's missing from the handbook? This is going to be a living, breathing document that we'd like to share. So we'll introduce the handbook. We'll talk at you for a little bit, but we will call out some key aspects of the handbook you might find useful. We want to learn about emerging approaches and learn about resources that we can cite. So think about what you're most proud of and sort of how we can potentially incorporate it into the handbook. So I will turn it over to Hao-Yi.
Thank you so much, Charles. So I'm going to give a little bit background why we're doing this. And then after these 2 slides, I'll also raise a couple questions there too. So this book was developed, it's actually under by it's a UN Statistics Division output, but it's guided by the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. This was a group that was established in 2015 by the UN Statistical Commission. So just think about commission as our board member consists of all chief statisticians from countries, because from UN Statistics Division, we serve our countries and national statistical offices. And so they come every year to meet in person while we work with them throughout the year. And then a bunch of things they will discuss. And this is the commission that established the Inter-Secretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. The biggest, there are 4 objectives, but biggest one is to improve coordination of survey activities across all international players. And then about advanced cross-cutting survey methodology, innovative ones, and scalable ones, enhanced communication and advocacy. I think we all now see that crisis again after around 2015 when we had a lot of big data concerns and it's going to replace surveys. So our group was there to continue to advocate for a really good probabilistic survey, how important it is to have it. And of course, we're there to support building capacity of countries. Right now we have 12 international organizations and 10 member states, and UNSD and ECLAC. We are the secretariat for the group. Sorry, I forgot to update that. Our current co-chair is UNESCO and UNICEF, so we have rotating co-chairs. Our group works through time-bound task forces, and they're usually led by members and also with contribution from non-member experts. So we are open to all colleagues. Next slide. So why do we do this handbook? And the previous version, that is a comprehensive that covers all the tasks of a survey, was 1984. So it was 40 years ago. As you can imagine, things changed so much since 1984. And then under a capacity development program, around the 80s to 90s, and there were a lot of handbook also issued by UN SD, but covering different aspects, sampling, questionnaire design. So they're kind of focusing on a specific area. So that's why we got a mandate. The mandate means the countries and NSOs ask us to develop a handbook and say, look, you need to have an updated version. That was in March 2024. And then 2 years later, now it's already submitted to the commission as a final draft. So it's a huge amount of work. Thanks to Charles and other colleagues. I see our authors on this webinar also. Thank you, Dale and Liz, for your help. Let me see. Well, so before I go to the next session, just quick. We've all seen our survey landscape have changed. That's why we're doing the handbook. But if you think about why we're doing this, it's for national statistics offices. And we started, like we means UNSD started working on handbook on surveys in the 1950s. Things have changed so much how countries are with their system. From very unified approach back then, and now the foundation infrastructure of conducting survey has changed. Some countries extremely developed with their frame and organizing their fieldwork, and some countries still are with the census frame, which is great, but census is also going to face a lot of challenges as well. So that has changed. Next slide. That's me, right? Okay, so thank you. I'll cover, I've mentioned this, data survey or national data landscape has changed. First, there's so much more to be collected. There has been a lot of advances in survey methodologies. And then survey is no longer the only data source in country. They have administrative data source, censuses, and then geospatial, maybe mobile phone positioning. So survey is only a part of national data ecosystem, and it's also countries tend to have a lot of surveys. It's just not one that really I think that reality heavily is reflected in our handbook. So our handbook, the revision, our main audience is NSOs, but we are also, of course, hope this handbook will be useful for other practitioners. And for some countries that has a decentralized system, and that means other entities within the government, but then really everyone here, we hope you find this handbook useful, and then if there's something we can do better, let us know. Key feature of the handbook, we try to, of course, from 1984 to now, a lot of things has happened, anything new, but we're very careful with emerging approaches. There are two emerging approach, something that's everyone's so excited about, but we haven't seen a hopeful use case or enough use cases. And we'll probably mention in the handbook, but we're not going to say, okay, please go ahead and use it. So if there's still an active area of research, we'll make sure that that's noted in the handbook. But we do really cover emerging methods that have been well tested, and we do recommend countries to pilot it and test it and adopt them in their own surveys. And the other thing is, the 1984 handbook was called Handbook of Household Surveys, and you might notice the title has changed from household survey to surveys of households and individuals. We very much care about people who are not part of the households, and what do we do with them. And so there are content information in the handbook about how to cover the individuals living outside of households. That's really hard to get them, but we had a try. And then the other thing is, survey is, as I mentioned, a part of larger data ecosystem in countries. They're no longer the only data source. So how do we design survey? Really think ahead that these data will be integrated with other data sources. Can I design the survey so they are interoperable by design already? So they're ready for data integration. And lastly, we don't want this handbook to be revised again in another 40 years, and we will keep it as a living document. Next slide. We did a lot of consultations, and survey has been very useful, and countries still acknowledge that as that. So we reached out to key experts and different regions and through workshops, and also from different population groups. What's so specific about migration IDPs, internal displaced person, refugees? What about gender aspect and personal disabilities? We want to make sure we understand the demand from the field, from countries and colleagues that are organizing surveys and wanted to capture things that they would like to capture. Next slide. Structure of the handbook. Is that me or you, Charles? Me? Still? Okay, two parts. First part, as Charles mentioned, is on the core task and then survey. They're pretty cross-cutting. And part two, we brought in a lot of different dimensions, whether it's a specific subject matter like education and labor, or population groups, IDP and refugees, and sometimes a specific country context here, for example, for small island, developing states, little islands in the Pacific and Caribbean. They are very unique. And then I think we have one on conflicts that we couldn't complete. Yes, we had requests to really produce guidance for countries under conflict and post-conflict for some of the MENA region countries, and we're still working on it. Governance, yes, I think we were able to do this in 2 years, hugely thanks to this governance structure that's set up. Thank you so much, Charles, for this. I think it's really that you had set us for success. So it's a really nice governance structure. And we have our co-chairs on site. We have a steering committee that worked together every single week and meet and to talk about progress and what needs to be supported, which area to come in. And under that, we have the technical committee focused on specific technical areas. And then now we have a dissemination committee that talks about the dissemination and the use of the handbook. How do we support that? With lead authors, steering committee members are the focal point to work with the lead authors. We have 2 here with us today, and co-authors, and then we have reviewers, and we have holistic reviewers, and of course technical editor Charles. He has been the one from the beginning to the end and everything. So this is the list. I'm not gonna read them, but thanks all. And these are our chapters, part 1 and part 2. Over to you.
All right, so thanks, Hao-Yi, for going over the process. So now we'll move into the content of the handbook. And so chapter 1 is an overview of the current survey landscape. Probably for this WAPOR audience, very little of this will be a surprise to you. Okay, so I'm not going to go through and define what respondent burden is here in this part of the presentation, but just orient you to a few to the overall ideas and call out a few key points. One of the key considerations of the handbook is to sort of future-proof the handbook, right? So we're writing the handbook in 2026, but we're going to update it, but we won't do major updates every, year or two. So a lot of the handbook anchors the design and implementation aspects in principles and frameworks. And so the handbook talks a lot about these frameworks. 3 are highlighted in chapter 1, the UN fundamental principles of official statistics. We've just posted principle 1 here. And I think for just as a survey methodologist and practitioner, all these frameworks are things we know about, right? But it's really useful to go back and sit down and clear your head and read them with a fresh view. So I would, encourage everyone to take a look at these fundamental principles, some of the UN quality assurance frameworks, and in particular. So shout out to the principles, and sometimes in the day-to-day they can get lost and you sort of take them for granted, but it actually will really improve your work if you go back and look at them with a fresh eye. So, okay, the chapter also talks about non-probability sampling. This is a hot topic. There have been a lot of heated APOR and WAPOR listserv exchanges about this, so we don't need to get too deep in here, other than to say that the handbook kind of notes that a lot of official statistics, aren't currently using non-probability sampling, but there's increased interest in it, and some countries are moving in that direction for specific use cases. The handbook talks a lot about modes, and again, I think for this audience, we don't need to go too deep on this, other than to think through a helpful distinction about mixed modes, right? Like two or modes used with different samples, so maybe face-to-face survey first, and then a phone survey for follow-up with non-respondents, or multi-mode, right? So two or more modes used with the same respondent. So face-to-face interview, and then when that interview is done, maybe there's an ACASI component afterwards. Inclusivity is a big theme of the handbook that cuts across different chapters, and the handbook kind of set up a little framework that I think is quite useful. So I just wanted to go through some of this briefly. So there's a distinction between inclusive data. Okay, so this is basically like, what do we collect about people to be able to be inclusive, right? So like collecting religion on a survey if appropriate, collecting ethnic origin if appropriate, right? So this is like the types of data we collect. And then inclusive data collection refers to how do we use survey methods designed to be inclusive to everyone in the target population, right? As how you mentioned, the non-household population are often excluded. So this is about inclusive data collection, right? It's a process of it. And then inclusive statistics are statistics that represent kind of reflect the existence and relevance of everyone, right? To do inclusive statistics, we need to have inclusive data and inclusive data collection too. So these three things sort of build off each other. So I found this a helpful framework to think about inclusivity in my own work. So the handbook does talk a lot about inclusive data collection, and the non-household population is it's a tough nut to crack. Okay, right? Survey coverage usually is restricted to household populations, right? But in practice, we draw inferences. Maybe in the methods report, we say the non-institutionalized household population in a particular country, but in practice, we just refer to the entire population, right? So this is an area where of increasing importance because of the rises of different non-household populations for a variety of reasons in different countries. And this is an area for future development of the handbook. There was a little bit of a tension, right, between how deep do we go on this, and this is an area where, in specific contexts, that really matters if we're excluding institutionalized populations or populations in non-households or populations who are marginally associated with different households. The handbook talks about a variety of things that this audience is well aware of as well. Key point 6 is about data integration and interoperability. And I think for a lot of folks in maybe the WAPOR community, maybe might think about this data integration a little bit less than the NSO or official statistics communities. In the sense that, as how you mentioned, a lot of NSOs around the world are, face a lot of resource constraints, but they're also getting, increased requests for data, right? And every time that there's a new request for data, we can't always just go design a new survey. So there's a really big movement in the NSO official statistics community in the UN world to work on data integration, right? So it's using data, combining data with different sources to, ideally not collecting new data if we don't need to. This will be an important part. The handbook doesn't get deep into data integration, but the handbook does talk about interoperability, right? So this is like related to the UN principle of coherence, right? You can't, if we don't design surveys to be able to link up together, we can't integrate them. Other key points in chapter 5, we talk about respondent burden, paired data, metadata, and communication and engagement as well. All right, so now we'll go to the core technical tasks here. And Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so we'll keep moving along. So I'll take a few of these chapters and then pass it to Hao-Yi for the other ones. So chapter 2 is about survey needs assessment and initiation. And this is a new chapter in the handbook because a lot of survey texts sort of just like start at like, great, let's get started with the questionnaire or the sampling, right? And there was of all the chapters that we wrote in the handbook, this chapter had the least published guidance in the literature. A lot of NSOs and or survey organizations around the world just sort of like have their own ways of working and to figure out what the need is, develop who are the stakeholders, what do they need, what's the scope in terms of this, how do we design a survey to address the need, and then what are the outputs of the survey, and then linking that up with funding. So this chapter was challenging to write, but also one of the kind of a key contribution of the handbook is to kind of set for the official statistics community a framework for how to have these conversations. Communication emerged as a critical item here. One, as we did a lot of stakeholder interviews, we noted again and again that the importance of internal communication, especially involving technical experts, like a lot of people in the WAPOR community, involving technical experts early on to define what the scope for the survey is and talk about the details, right? A lot of these things are where the devil is in the details, where it's important to have the technical folks involved early on. So that's a theme for this chapter. And also external communication, right? So these things are iterative, right? You have a need, you design a survey, you don't have enough money for it, so you got to adjust the scope or the need. So the chapter talks quite a bit about that in the context of official statistics. But almost all this applies to private sector organizations or academics too. So so you might find this chapter helpful. For me, as someone outside of the official statistics community, directly, it was really helpful to learn about the different, how needs arise, right? Governments, field requests from within the NSO, from maybe there's a new government priority, either a law or a new priority from the from leadership, international partners, new ILO guidance on employment, may prompt a change for new data collection as well. The scope, one of the most interesting parts of this chapter was kind of thinking about agreements about data ownership, data access, and data preservation, right? So as we're thinking about the outputs for a survey, important to think through these items as well. Okay. Another key theme is about, should new data be collected? And the handbook has a framework for deciding, whether to proceed with new data collection, right? Is NSO required to collect the data? If so, then great, go do it. Is a new collection necessary? Or maybe can we address the need with existing data? Is it aligned with the principles? Is it related to critical priorities? Does it fall within the NSO's mandate or maybe someone else, another group should do it? Is there funding? Is a new data collection operationally and technical feasible? And, are there any negative consequences? So these things might seem obvious when you just put it up on a slide and you're like, of course, we should make sure that, we have enough money to do the survey. But in practice, these items, both for NSOs and other organizations, can lead to big challenges, aren't thought of and can lead to big challenges down the road. There are some case studies, a nice case study from Uganda and from Saudi Arabia highlighted here with some practical tools. The next chapter is on survey management, which is on, the governance structure, kind of project management, before, during, and after our data collection. Questionnaire is chapter 4. So this is the start of the hardcore technical chapters. So this is a lovely chapter that goes through, from the very beginning, of an inception of an idea for a survey to, ending up with the final translated, wonderful tested instrument in a computer assisted data collection environment. There's actually a webinar tomorrow. Maybe we can put a link in the chat on this chapter from the handbook. It's 90 minutes just on this chapter, and we have some really amazing NSO and and other colleagues presenting. Some key callouts for this one. I think this is a really nice, if you have students or colleagues or someone who's getting into questionnaire design, this chapter has a really nice set of frameworks at the beginning about the cognitive response process, the QDET framework, respondent-centered design, that just kind of helps you, provides a framework for thinking about these issues. That's really good. It also has some super practical, do this, don't do that, key principles and tips. So the translation section in this chapter is really strong and talks a lot about, there's a nice text box about the perils and dangers of back translation, which is still commonly used despite a lot of evidence in the scientific literature that it results in some, overly literal and some errors. And then there's a great section on instrumentation in terms of the questionnaire specs, hardware, software. This chapter does talk about some emerging approaches with, machine translation. I would love to hear from this audience about who's using machine translation and how, right? So this is an area, a hot topic in this field, as well as generative AI for a host of, working on these topics. All right, Dale Rhoda is here. He's one of the co-authors for Chapter 5. So Dale, I apologize in advance if I'm getting any of this wrong. It's hard to review it in just a minute. But Chapter 5 is the big chapter on frames and sampling. It's actually kind of a mini book, honestly, monograph on frames and sampling. So the chapter it kind of goes through how, characteristics of frames, sources, frame types, and then how do we draw samples from those frames. I would say thinking about where the WAPOR audience might plug into this, like the questionnaire design chapter, this is a fabulous introduction to the concept of frames, okay? And it's for non-technical audiences too. So yes, there are a few formulas here and there, but the formulas are actually very accessible. So if you have, students, colleagues, other people who are looking to understand sample design, I would send them, to this section first. There's some nice graphics, like you see here about two-stage sampling, and there are some nice case studies as well. All right, I'll round out my section by talking about Chapter 6 data collection. And we have Liz Zeckmeister, who's our fearless leader for Chapter 6 here on the call too. So Liz, please chime in during the discussion if there's anything else you wanted to call out. So again, this is almost like a book in itself. I think the final, length was something like 90 pages. So it goes through from start to finish on the data collection task. Some key callouts here for the WAPOR audience is, reflect staffing, right? So surveys remain, labor-intensive area and a lot of NSOs, staffing rises to the top with challenges. There's some nice examples of retention strategies, for example, from Statistics Portugal. A lot of organizations will find this chapter useful in terms of the practical resources. Like there is like a text box with 12 things to include in an advance letter, right? Some really practical examples there. And the production monitoring has a lot of great examples with some ideas for dashboards and examples from NSOs as well. There's a great QC section as well. Data collection, emerging approaches. There's a lot to talk about here. So I'm hoping you all have your thinking caps on and you're thinking about how, what resources that you could share with these topics or other topics. So machine learning for quality control, right? AI for various tasks of the data collection process. New modes is always in there, and then data collection. In times of crisis, although, you might sometimes think that your own data collection is in crisis. So please, looking forward to hearing more about that. And looking for data processing. Over to you, Hao-Yi. You're on mute.
Hello, hi. So this is the structure of data processing. I'm feeling lucky that our authors are not here. So this is I mean, I've just to reflect on this. I think this is one of the challenging chapters. It also reflect what's going on in the literatures that's available. There are a lot to look for information for the other topics and data processing, and I think chapter 2, needs assessment and survey management. These are just the ones that a lot had to really start from scratch, or things that we had to do a lot of repetitions. Let's not go into that direction, but this is how the data processing structure looks like. And if you can go on go through the steps, I will highlight some of the key points and takeaway points that the chapter authors would like countries and SOs users to take note. But this chapter really turns raw survey data to cleaned one, validated, and then ready to be integrated, already integrated, and then ready for analysis. So this chapter covers editing, imputation, and then deriving variables. And then there has been, of course, metadata that's heavily covered, data storage. There's a little bit of discussion on the AI, which actually this chapter has. I think data processing is one of the most promising fields for AI. Next slide. So what are the key points that the authors would like the users to take note? First of all, data processing is not just that stage after everything has been done. So colleagues need to be really data processing colleagues had to be really involved from the very beginning, and from the design and all the way to everything, data collection and questionnaire design, all the way and until when the data are collected. So they need to be engaged in the very early steps of a survey. And given that how NSOs are structured very differently, and so this chapter doesn't really talk about the roles, but it's really on the functions, what needs to be done instead of who should be doing it. Because sometimes we're a very small office and it's really a few people and people are doing everything. So that's another. And the other is, I'm sure you all know, it's really an art, like making decision. How much should I do it? Too much is not good. And too little is also not good. When to do it. And of course, the more you do it, and there's this balancing between time, effort, and complexity and cost. And sometimes it's usability, but it's overly edited file and has its own damage as well. So that's really an art. I think that's why it was part of the reason why it was so hard for us to write. I mean, everyone has an explanation, interpretation of art. And then documentation, absolutely. And everything has to be documented. It talks about even for manual editing and the audit trace, auditing needs to be left. So make sure everyone, all the others who are not in the process, understand what you've done for every single digit, like every number that. And then the data released later on will not be useful without a proper documentation for this step. Next slide. I mean, at least when we were drafting this handbook, I think just before a few months ago, and I think in the survey field and this community has a lot more experience in the use of AI. But when we were working on the handbook, and this is one of the chapters, it's very promising. For example, there has been a lot of use cases in NSOs, National School Offices, on coding of open questions, responses. And then, of course, there's AI-assisted editing, identify something that's not right, and data editing and imputation. So that's been quite proven to be very useful. And then the media capture, really having audio, photo, videos at the interview, and later on those information will be used to improve data accuracy and provide a little bit of background and qualitative information and improve transparency. But then the chapter does have a lengthy section or more on the ethics. Is it ethical? I mean, what are the consideration that consent you should be getting from the respondents? So this is chapter 7. 8 is weighting, and we all know, I'm not going to repeat how important weighting is for surveys, and this is how we structure the chapter. And I'm not going to read it. Yes, okay. Key points, important to have weights, place, and do it right. And then there's when there has to be a prioritization, whether against bias and efficiency, and the chapter calls for prioritizing protection against bias while seeking to improve efficiency. And clear principles to improve quality each step. And there is a sequential process. Please follow that. That's the message. And so it's with the principled and controlled and minimum. Don't do unnecessary if it's not necessary. Don't do it. Certain step. And then there's a section on how really importance of diagnostics before the final weights are released, and make sure to check that they are. It's extremely important. They're valid, stable, and trustworthy. And again, there's also about transparency, metadata, and dissemination. Document them, make them transparent, disseminate them, and so the users are aware what has been done in terms of weighting.
So, Heidi, sorry to jump in. I think, especially, I wanted to call it this chapter too for having striking a really nice balance between being like technically sophisticated and deep and accessible. So if you have, again, like students, colleagues, like new people that are upskilling, there are not that many accessible texts about survey statistical weighting. And so I'd really recommend this chapter. So just wanted to emphasize that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Heidi, back to you.
Thanks. So emerging approaches that there's one point that the chapter covers is using weighting to help reduce biases from non-probabilistic samples. Chapter 9, data analysis. It's a very interesting chapter that really covers a very comprehensive overview of what people should do for their data analysis. It also uses one example from a data set publicly available, and then illustrated how each step could be done with that example. So this is how, and then the authors have worked with National Statistical Office support countries, and one of the most challenging aspect, or a lot of countries don't do, is modeling and data analysis, and there's only descriptive statistics, and they stop there. So the chapter really calls for NSO, National Statistical Office, to really do a lot more, with the survey data. And next slide. So what are the key messages? And the chapter does distinguish because there are secondary data users like me go on NSO website and download data set and start from there. But there are also data analysis roles for colleagues that did the data collection within the same office. So there's this guidance for these two distinct roles. And then the chapter calls for identify key design feature. As we said, doing complex survey analysis, you really have to take into consideration all the design features. Don't just do a model without any weights. So accounting for the sample design, for everything, basic tabulation, analysis, and modeling. And the other thing that really talk about is anything found out, it's not for secondary data user, but for primary, even for secondary data users, provide feedbacks to designs. Make sure it's a loop, like after the analysis, if you see something that's not working well, and make sure those feedback go back to the survey design team and provide feedback on so they can improve for the next survey. And again, the chapter calls for transparency, documentation, make sure it's reproducible. The emerging approaches that this chapter talks about also covers non-probabilistic sampling, integration with non-traditional data sources, and of course the smart error estimation and record linkage are being discussed. Chapter 10. This chapter is I really like its linkage to the principles of data quality framework that Charles has mentioned as earlier. So it does talk about the principles, and I'll get into a little bit. And then it talks about what's the core. That's most countries are actually doing that right now. They also go to the emerging approaches for disseminating, be more creative to disseminate all the information and a little bit on the communication user engagement. We don't have a big chapter on communication, and it talks about main challenges. Next slide. So this is to align on the first big bullet point. The chapter author look at the framework. There's a UN data quality assurance framework for official statistics. It actually matches, the key messages the chapter would like to emphasize against the list of principles or quality dimensions under that UN data quality assurance framework. And it's very interesting. Relevance, it's about really make sure you speak to the right audience and then tailor your message. And so I'm not going to repeat that, but and then offering core and creative output. Next slide. Yes, so core we all know, like I'm not going to repeat that. Sorry, I didn't have a slide on that, the core product. But for the creative dissemination, I put it under emerging approaches. It talks about disseminating your program and scripts and using APIs for better access of your data. It's called, and there's also scrolling, telling. I had an example, interactive tools and dashboards and chatbots. But the chatbots, the author said, you either do it very well or don't do it. If it's a terrible one, don't use it. And podcasts and audio products, and to use that to communicate, and then videos. Those are some of the exciting output that dissemination that, countries have asked to experiment and work on it. Is that me again or you?
This is you. How are you?
Oh, okay. Part two, all right. So, I feel like I've been speaking a lot, but so I'll make it very concise. We have 7 chapters. As you can see, I've mentioned by topics, education, governance, crime victimization. Governance is really a new area of data collection for surveys, at least for official surveys, and labor, wealth. And then we have a chapter on mainstreaming gender perspective. And we did receive a lot of comments from the gender colleagues as well to make sure that we also integrate some of their elements in part 1. And then there's a survey of forcibly displaced people, including IDP internal displaced and refugees, and then the survey in small islands developing states. So what is it really for is, well, standard practice doesn't always apply. And you think, for example, if there's a household frame, and what do we do with refugees living in camps? So that's why that chapter for IDP or or for displaced people, and then that goes towards that question, give additional guidance. For example, how do we bring the different frames together? And then there's biases. For example, when we would like to know about individual experiences and their employment, their status, and what to do if when we enter the households and it's the head of household that's responding for everybody. So what to do, and then the gender chapter focuses a lot on that, and to make sure that the proxy compare or the labor force and look at the difference between the proxy and self-reported, and being fully aware of the biases that come with it. And other part 2 is, for example, are we measuring what we would like to measure? Are we structurally excluding someone? And then adaptation. There was something about, for example, for small island developing state, like little islands, and sometimes they have 400 islands within the country. The challenges, and how do we really make sure that those challenges our countries are aware of those challenges and then maybe find inspiration. And sometimes we don't have a solution. There's no solution to resolve that, but they can learn from others. And this is country A who has done that in that situation. And then, of course, and there's in some of the chapter we talk about whether survey data is sufficient and whether other data sources should be brought in. And then there's an aspect on ethics, political, operational risk that needs to be managed. And I think that's gonna become big time for the country under crisis. And how should results be released without misinterpretation? So part two somehow go into some of the specific challenges for special population, certain population groups, and then also for countries under different situations. So this is something that we would like to bring to the attention to our countries when they have a special focus survey. Here's some examples. Education, that's where I talk about data integration. We do a survey, and then there are a lot of administrative data sources for education, from Ministry of Education. What if they don't align? And for labor, for example, the new ICLS, International, oh my God, International Conference of Labor Statisticians. So that's a tripartite conference that has labor statisticians, but also labor unions and government partners. So it's like three parties. They meet every 5 years, and then the standards change every so often. I'm not saying that changes all the time. So I remember 10 years ago, they changed the standard of employment definition. As you can see, how countries are getting very stressed about the breaking serious. So how do you manage that? It's a huge challenge. And governance of crime, and there are sensitive topics. And how do you really redesign privacy protocols? And wealth and questionnaires set sequencing and non-response is extremely important for wealth management. And this place I mentioned about the frames. And seeds is a very interesting example. None of the challenges it faces is very unique to it, but it sort of faces all the compounded challenges in one situation. So that's really, really difficult. Next slide. Do we need to go through every?
Yeah, I think we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can skip this so we can get into the discussion. So
Yes, let's do that.
good. So thank you, Hai, for going through part two. I think so there are a few questions in the chat that we can get to. So we have 35 minutes for the discussion, which is great. So we'll talk about the things in the questions in the chat, but also, think about, we'd love to hear from you about these 4 questions, right? So there's a lot of innovation going on now and global survey research. We've highlighted some emerging approaches. I'm 100% sure that we have not gotten to all the important ones, right? So what, in the area that you work in, what sort of emerging approaches do you think we need to add to the handbook or enhance? Are there practical resources, right, that, are public that we could add to the handbook's online platform to support NSOs? They don't have to be for NSOs, but just like things in your practical work that you might want to think we can add. How can you all, so that, this handbook is really, public good for the global community, right? So, so it's not us going out and disseminating, it's all of us being defined as, the UN and, WAPOR community and others working in surveys. How can we all support dissemination and use of the handbook? And then sort of like what's missing, right? What do we need more of? And there's a few aspects of this in the chat that we can get to. So, so those are our questions for you, and this is a chance to share. So let me start with Jamie's question. So Jamie in the chat is asking, in data analysis, is there anything on the use of machine learning methods and whether you can incorporate the sample design in the process? And my short answer is I don't think this chapter goes deep in that. I think the chapter talks about machine learning can be used for data analysis. But Jamie, if you're able to come off mute, do you want to say, are you able to say a few words on this? Like what, in your experience, how can machine learning be used in data analysis, and sample design can be tricky with machine learning to integrate into analysis. So um, if you're able to come off mute or just share in the chat any other things that we should be thinking about, that would be great. Oh, how to come off mute. Oh, I think, yeah.
Ah, okay. Can you hear
Thanks,
me now?
thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, Charles. Thank you. Yeah, it's actually a question because I don't know the answer to it. I mean, I attended a relatively short course run by the University of Essex that took us through machine learning methods, sort of random forest and cat boost methods. And I think they were unclear about whether there are any any option to include sample design elements for, multi-stage complex sample design into how you run it, or even weights, for example. So I just wanted to ask if anyone else had experience of doing these techniques and using and being able to use this information or not.
Thanks, Jamie. Great question. If anyone has an answer to Jamie, maybe you could just put it in the chat or send us an email to follow up, and then we can get that answered for Jamie. But if Jamie has that question, I'm sure a lot of other people do too. So thanks for the question, Jamie. I appreciate it. There's another question in the chat about children. Manish, thanks for asking about children and who are non-household based, right? Children in street situations and children on the move. Does the handbook cover this group? Short answer is not really. There are some resources out there on non-household populations that are companions to the handbook, but the handbook doesn't thoroughly address any of those. So I may sound like a broken record, apologies, but if anyone has resources for Manish or that we could cite in the handbook on, especially with regard to children, non-household populations, please share in the chat or let us know after. That would be helpful. So over to you. I think the process would be if you want to talk, if you could raise your hand, and then Ksenia, I think, do you need to unmute people? Jamie, I'm assuming that's an old hand that you have up. You might want to lower your hand so we don't think you have a question if you don't.
Should I leave an email here in case colleagues are interested in being part of the next steps? We're not done yet, right? And as I've mentioned about living document, and there are a lot of things we didn't cover. And we did a lot of consultations, so we're putting together a report of what came out of the consultations. And if we compare them side by side, what's being demanded, what we were able to deliver, and I'm sure there's gaps. So there are a lot of things we know that we need to cover moving forward. So if you like to be in that community and then moving forward for two things. One is bringing new things, bring your expertise, or there's something that's missing, and then you would like to be part of that. And the other is if you like to support the use and disseminate, or if you like to use the handbook, give it a try and tell us something's not right, or giving us feedback on that, I think very much welcome, and we would very much appreciate that. Let me put my email there. If you would like to be part of that exciting process, to really keep it going. And because one of the biggest requests from countries is also in addition to the handbook, and they would like to see how their neighboring countries have been doing things. So this is part of the next step, the platform of sharing knowledge is we would like to learn from, if there anything that you would like to share, I think that's something that we would very much welcome.
Jamie has another point in the chat about random walk, and chapter 5 on sample design does describe random walk as one method for household selection. It doesn't go super deep into it. The handbook also does has a few lines on gridded population sampling, which can be used for household selection as well. It doesn't go deep into it though, and I think this might be an area where the handbook could do more, because random walk is used frequently, but we all know that there are challenges with random walk for household selection. So Dale, let me go over to you. I'm not sure if you're still on, Dale, but are you able to come off mute and share anything about random walk?
Dale's not here anymore.
Oh, okay. He may have had a drop. He was on earlier. But thanks, Jamie. Jamie, anything to add there? You said you had some other ideas. We can't hear you, Jamie, if you're talking. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I came across some papers by Bauer, Johannes Bauer,
Yeah.
in Germany, who had written designs, and I think he had tested out a couple of the designs typically used by research companies to do random walks. This was in Europe. In Germany, he's able to get census information down at the household level. So he was able to simulate these random walks and test whether they were producing equal probabilities of selection at the household level, which they weren't. And some of them were really poor at reproducing that. So you not only got variable probabilities of selection at the household level, he also showed that this could lead to bias estimates when looking at some of the census data. So he did, in a third paper, develop a grid-based approach where the enumerator follows a grid and it has different directions on that grid, a direction matrix, I think it was called, which we've implemented. Used to work at Varian, and we implemented it on European Working Conditions Survey, which was a 35 country study across Europe, in the countries where we can get hold of a register and have to do a random walk approach. We also, so I think there's an interesting opportunity there to look at, what more recent ways of doing random walks and whether there's learnings across the countries in terms of the random walk approaches they take to show that they are truly random. And then there's also the selection of start addresses. And, with big data now, we've been looking at using building footprint data to identify start locations and overlaying that with land use data to identify buildings that are in predominantly residential areas. And that, I think, is an area that might be quite interesting, is also easily accessible from free open source data sets as well.
Thanks, Jamie. Great thoughts. That actually goes to Tim's question on geosampling. Tim, do you want to, Ksenia, are you able to unmute Tim? Tim, do you want to come off mute and ask your question and elaborate if you can?
How about that?
There we go. We can hear you. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, very similar to Jamie's question. We're facing a lot more data poor environments, especially internationally in Africa and Southeast Asia. Census releases are not, or full census releases are not as common as they used to be. So there is a growing uh, push to use these open source resources like street data maps and building footprint data and even full geosampling with satellite imagery and really creating maybe not full sampling frames, but at least doing gridded um, household selection within known administrative things. What I have found is that a lot of that faces stakeholder reticence to fully buy into such approaches. So I don't know if that was covered in the handbook of just these are emerging approaches. We're trying to gain momentum and credibility with them, or what else we can do to start gaining those more credibility.
Hmm. Thanks, Tim. It's a great question. The handbook doesn't go like deep, has section on gridded population, but doesn't go deep into some of those. But let me go over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, I would like to hear. I think I don't know how long is the webinar, but just reflecting on what you talk about and the challenge we're facing for some of the countries. Not only it's about census data release, but its census coverage has been going down from some parts of the world, and we're struggling with building a sample frame for those countries. If you like to continue a conversation, see uh, how support can be provided to those countries, and then we'll be able to, I mean, if it works so well, I think we will be able to elevate a little bit really to the global level, so through our network and the platform. I mean, we are aware that some of the data poor, like some part of the country that hasn't had a census for the past, or there are conflict areas you can't really go in. And then the geo sampling has been used, but just like to pick your brain on census if the coverage is so poor, is this a plausible way moving forward for them? And they
Yeah.
don't have good administrative data, so no registers, or at least no digitized registers.
No, no. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. You know how to reach me, Hai.
Yeah, I mean, let's chat because we are actually looking for solution for a couple of countries under that situation. We managed to support them for a population estimates, for all sorts of purposes, but now the frame it's a huge problem, challenge for the country for all their surveys.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And Tim, I think your point about stakeholder buy-in is an important one. And one thing, I just put in a chat a link in the chat about the gridpopsurvey.com, which is great if anyone hasn't seen that. But I feel like to really get stakeholder buy-in, we need to make it more, cost and time efficient to do these. And, we need a lot more shared resources that because as anyone who's done geosampling or gridded population sampling knows, there's a non-trivial sunk cost to doing it for the first time in a country, wrangling the data sources and such. And it'd be great if, as a global community, if we could have more shared resources to defray some of those sunk costs and ultimately improve the quality of the samples.
Yes, if I that's yes, I think if any resource can be shared, and I also have for the greater population, I was just wondering because their greater population groups rely on censuses to refine their greater population. So it's almost like a circle that's if the census is not doing well, I mean, will the greater population do better job? So I haven't figured out like how they can support each other. What do we do if there's no census? That's why people talk about good census is a big foundation. Is there a way to improve without a good census? I don't know. I mean, bring everything together. If Tim or other colleagues were interested in having a discussion on building a frame without a good census.
Mhm. Claire, you put a note in the chat. If you're able to, Ksenia, if you're able to unmute Claire, if you're able to speak.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was just trying to find a link. So WorldPop, so I used to work at WorldPop, and we were developing methods which we called as a bottom-up process instead of a top-down process. So top-down being where you start with population estimates for census units, and they're being disaggregated to a high spatial resolution. But then the bottom-up methods were essentially using enumeration for sampled locations and then building statistical models to then be able to predict population across the whole of space at a high spatial resolution. I can put a link in the chat to some more information about these methodologies. WorldPop is still developing these methods and still producing population estimates for certain countries using these methods. So I'll add a link so that everyone has the more information about it.
Thank you.
Other ideas or questions or feedback, things that you think the handbook should cover? Yes, we love WorldPop, and it's like I said, it's free, so it's pretty amazing. All right, we'll give everyone another few seconds to think if you want to raise your hand or put something in the chat. Otherwise, we can close the webinar, but let's see if anyone has anything else to add. One note is that the link to the handbook is in the chat. So this is a public document. It's not final yet. So please take a look at it and share any feedback. And I think one thing we didn't really explain a lot is that this will be a digital first resource. So it'll be put on an online website later this year after the editing process. And it'll be put as an online platform. There will be an official book, but that's kind of secondary to the digital one. So do we have sessions on specific chapters? There's one question. There's one planned tomorrow, but yes, we are planning on doing webinars on all the different chapters. There's one planned on chapter 6. I believe these are mostly done through IASS. Is that right? Do you have any info on when the other webinars would be? Oh, you're on mute.
We are organizing from the Inter-Secretariat Working Group. So was it tomorrow? We have one on questionnaire design.
Yep.
Yes, and then we're now working with the lead authors on the dates and set up a date. So we'll give time to chapter lead authors to explain what's being covered in their chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So they will be coming out. If you're interested, please also email us to be on the mailing list. Let me put my email again. And we send out monthly newsletters to colleagues for anything that's coming up.
Sounds good. There's a question in the chat about a link to tomorrow's webinar that
Yes,
we
let me.
already pasted it above. You can look at it. It's a Zoom link. Oh no,
Here.
it's a Teams link.
Yes.
So you can take a look there. Thanks, Hao-Yi. There's a question on anything in cross-national harmonization apart from translation. There's I would say there's passing reference to the cross-national harmonization. That's not a central focus in the handbook other than to talk about like just, you know, the generic importance of it. But there are some resources in there about, especially in part 2, about cross harmonization for specific areas, right? So the labor statistics chapter, education chapter talks about cross-national harmonization as well. So there's it's a little bit in the sprinkled throughout the handbook, I would say. Lynn, thanks for the question. Let's see, did I miss anything? There's a question about practical guidelines in terms of training, operations, and business. Yes, so we tried to make the data collection, especially chapter that Liz and her team produced, very practical. So there are a lot of practical aspects there. In terms of the online platform, this is an area that, you know, I'm hopeful that this platform can be a repository for super practical guidelines like training checklist, for example, like how to, you know, things to prepare before training. Hoping we can, you know, make this kind of a community of practice where people deposit these things and we can learn from each other to help reduce burden and support NSOs and other organizations. So thanks for the question. All right, I think that's it. Let me pause for 1 second. There was a little burst of questions, so let me pause for 1 more second. All right, so thanks so much for joining. Hao-Yi, any closing words from the UN Statistics Division perspective?
Sorry, and I think it's really to thank everyone who joined the webinar today, and then you're part of this community. So we very much wanted to think this way that we would like to have you're the expert, you have worked with the countries in the field in the very difficult situations, or all in all, please be part of a community, share your knowledge, experience. We also hope to bring back and pay back to your surveys through other experiences we gathered from countries. And so please call on you to join this community to work together.
Thank you so much, Hao-Yi. Colin, I'll just answer your question briefly. The part 2 about cross-national harmonization for the SDGs, part 2 has content that's meant to live beyond the SDGs on specific, you know, subject matter, you know, especially UN guidance on specific content. The handbook doesn't really reference SDGs because they're likely to change quite a bit after, you know, in 2030 and beyond. And Hao-Yi thinks 1/3 of SDGs rely on surveys. So if we want the SDGs, we need survey data to support them. Yeah. Okay, thank you all very much for joining. We appreciate your efforts, and let's this is just a kickoff to a hopefully much larger conversation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day ahead.